everybody, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will be demonstrating how to use watercolor markers. Now for this demo, I'll be using the Winsor & Newton watercolor markers, but any brand here will work very similarly, and showing you how I created this iris flower. If you haven't already and you would like to, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button and the notification bell if you would please, and leave me some comments down below because I'd love to hear from you. Now without further ado, let's get right on into the tutorial. So starting off, I've already applied masking fluid to any areas where I wanted to preserve the whites of my paper, particularly the veining in the detailed areas of the iris flowers. And I'm working on the Strathmore 500 series hot press watercolor paper. The 500 series is archival safe, 100% cotton, and suitable for professional artwork, so I can sell this painting down the road. I'm using the Winsor & Newton watercolor markers for this, and I do have a full review on my channel on these markers, so I'll go ahead and link that up in the iCards and in the description box down below in case you guys are interested. But for now, these markers are a light, fast, real pigment watercolor marker, which makes them somewhat unique to the art marker market. Now, I'm just starting by blocking in the local colors I see identified within the iris flower. I'm dropping in varying tones of purple, blue, magenta, and mauve, respectively. Just drawing them right on using gentle strokes on dry paper. Then I'll come in and activate that color with a wet brush to blend the paint. Now, one thing to take note of about these is that you really don't want to let these markers sit on the paper too long. So you really want to get in there and blend them out right away. Otherwise, they have a tendency to stain the paper and really not want to move around too much for you. Especially the blues, and I'm not really sure why, but I did include a great tip to work around that issue in my review, by the way, so you'll have to watch that video if you're interested on more information on that. Another thing to take note of is, again, I'm working on a hot press watercolor paper. It's important to understand that different papers will yield different results, and depending on the desired effect, you'll want to select your paper accordingly. While you certainly can use a cold press watercolor paper, and it might be beneficial to add textural effects to landscape work, for example, the coarse texture does add extra stress on the brush nibs, and that repeated friction will wear the tips of your markers down much faster. To protect your investment and increase the life of your marker, I highly recommend working on a hot press paper. Its smoother surface will allow for much gentler wear on your supplies. However, this is not without its challenges, as the hot press tends to be a more fragile substrate. So you'll just want to be very gentle with your marks. Notice that I'm not using a lot of scrubbing back and forth motions like you might use with a traditional alcohol marker. Just gentle swipes in one direction, not windshield wiper motions or circular motions, as this can cause the paper surface to become damaged and peel up. It's important that your strokes follow the shape of the object that you're rendering to show shape and form and dimension. Here, my flower petals flow, curl over in some places, and I want my marks to reflect that shape. I want to really get that gesture, that movement in there. I want them to bend with the direction of the petals should some of those marks remain pure and unblended. And inevitably, not all of those marks will dissolve, so you will see some of these pure strokes through in the end piece. And you really want to make sure that they are following the shape. They're following the gentle curves and bends where appropriate to show that form. Now, working with these markers, I found this color palette to be a pretty limited selection, but it really wasn't that much of an issue. Since they are watercolor, I can mix pretty much indefinitely. And whenever I wanted a lighter value of a color, I just scribbled some off on a scrap piece of paper or I used a small palette off to the side and picked it up that way with a brush after diluting it quite a bit with water. And I found that method, that technique, to work the best in my opinion. I also experimented with leaving highlighted areas free from color and just letting the white of the paper show before activating the color, and I had limited success with this technique. One reason it doesn't always work is that these markers are very saturated and a little goes a very long way. So when working with these darker, richer colors, it's difficult to preserve your lighter values. So with this method, the highlights just tend to get gobbled up by all that pigment. So in some cases it worked out pretty good, but it really just depends on what color you're working with. I also found that the shade Pale Rose was very useful for keeping an area light, since I had no light purple marker, but the Pale Rose proved to be so versatile, not only because it was useful for lighter areas, but it was a good mixer shade whenever I wanted to warm up the purple. I added it in, or when dulling down greens. Winsor & Newton's sap green is very beautiful, but it's still pretty chromatic and too vibrant to be a believable green in botanical work, in my opinion. So in many cases, I base coated an area with that Pale Rose before applying the sap green on top, and it worked perfectly to neutralize the green, but not kill it to the point where the flower didn't look fresh anymore. So that Pale Rose shade really proved to be a workhorse for this piece and several others that I did in the future. Now, in case you were wondering about the buildability or the ability to layer these markers, I was able to come in and add a second layer and even a third layer in some places. And you can glaze with these markers just like traditional watercolors. They are very transparent and very workable. In some cases, I was glazing straight from the marker, but I found it worked much better if I glazed using a soft brush that I'd used to pick up the color off of a palette after diluting it some. In this instance, you do lose some of the immediacy of the medium, some of the portability, like if you wanted to travel with these, but I don't think it's really too much of an issue to bring a small porcelain dish with you to scribble the markers off with if you wanted to bring these to paint on location. And certainly you wouldn't have to palette everything. Now, after removing the masking fluid using a rubber cement pickup, I went in using the smaller bullet nib end of the marker to clean up those lines, sharpen up those details inside the iris flower. I added tiny dots and dashes, and I let those white veins just fade down into the darkness of the lower petal. I achieved this by using glaze techniques. Something else to keep in mind is that the smaller bullet end nib of the marker is much more fragile than the brush end. So it seems like a fiber nib, so you don't want to bear down weight on that. You really want to be much more gentle with those marks, because I don't think that nib can hold up to a lot of pressure. I really loved the versatility of switching between drawing and painting. These Winsor & Newton watercolor markers really combined the best of both worlds. The vibrancy and luminosity of a watercolor paint with the convenience of a marker. Very cool. Let me know in the comment section down below if you guys would be interested to see more tutorials using these, or even some beginner-friendly videos using them, because I'd be interested to do them if you guys would like. I came in on top using some Polychromos color pencils from Faber Castell to add some fine, tiny details that couldn't be achieved with my markers. Now, I do have a full review on the Polychromos color pencils, so I will leave them linked up in the iCards and in the description box down below as well, in case you guys were interested, but it's a full and comprehensive review on the Faber Castell Polychromos color pencils. I love using the Polychromos color pencils over watercolor because they're semi-transparent and they mesh very well with the watercolor. They don't stand out in a way that makes it glaringly obvious that you've used color pencil on top. And they don't give off too much shine either, like a more wax base. So they just blend beautifully with the medium. They work with it rather than seeming to disrespect it or fight against the work that you've already done. That pretty much wraps up today's tutorial. I wanted to thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And as always, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!